The Dave Hooker Show, represented by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorneys. Play to win, banksjones.com.
The Dave Hooker Show. A presentation of Off the Hook Sports. Objective insight, expertise, top guests. Available on YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and the Off the Hook Sports app. Download now for free. Also available on offthehooksports.com.
I compute and obey.
Now to Dave Hooker.
Ready.
Your Diamond Vols are SEC champions. Congratulations to Tony Vitello and the crew. No choke there, but we'll talk some biggest Tennessee choke jobs in Tennessee history after what the Nuggets did over the weekend. We count down the most important Vols. Now we're at Squirrel White. He is very important. Disappointing season last year, we can discuss, but Squirrel White is going to be key in the slot, especially since we think Dante Thornton's going to be on the outside. Should athletes be allowed to just focus on their sport while in school? Chaz Lanier visiting Kentucky and BYU. We're going to talk a little bit of hoops and the Vols on the football field. They're going to have a lot of draft picks in 2025. Caleb Calhoun, how are you, sir?
I am good. Happy Monday, Dave.
Happy Monday. And there seems to be a little miscommunication. We took Friday off, but Caleb wasn't having a baby yet. That's still 3 weeks away. I got some messages saying, congratulations on Caleb. I hope everything went well. I was like, no, it wasn't this weekend. We got like 3 weeks to go, don't we?
3 weeks to go. It was kind of a mental health day for me because I have a lot to get ready for the baby. And you guys can all judge me on the message board because I had a meltdown trying to put together the crib over the weekend. And I will probably call a handyman to do it and look completely useless.
I don't blame you. Hit that like and subscribe button. Yeah, BYU Smoky Mountain Red has apparently jumped in the Chaz Lanier sweepstakes. So we'll get to that. But more pressing, if we may, and that is Tennessee wins the SEC regular season championship in baseball. Today's tough question is right now, as it's brought to you by our good friends at, of course, City Heating and Air Conditioning.
Today's tough question. Take a side. Take a stand. The Dave Hooker Show, a presentation of offthehooksports.com.
I'm curious what you think, Caleb, of Tennessee being really good in baseball and softball, being good in basketball, but considering the team they had, I thought it was the run they should have had, an average run. And then when I look at Tennessee's football team, I don't think there's any question that was a disappointing year based off our expectations. You can judge it yourself. It's strange. Is it good? Is it bad that Tennessee's spring sports seem to be carrying this little bit of oomph at the end? Or do you still say to yourself, you'd rather it be a Final Four and a college football playoff? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I think you'd still rather it be a Final Four and college football playoff, but I think it's wildly ironic, honestly. And it's ironic for a couple of reasons. So I think we could safely say football, baseball, men's basketball, women's basketball is like the four most important sports. And then like a fifth that's significantly below that, but ahead of every other sport would be softball. Is that safe to say?
I think that's very safe to say, yeah. And softball is kind of getting as big as it's baseball in some circles. But anyway.
Yeah. So Tennessee won the regular season title in softball, baseball, and men's basketball for the SEC. But by far, their two best sports in history of those five is football and women's basketball, isn't it? Like, not even a question. So Correct. It's ironic that those were the two to not win. Here's another layer of irony on top of that, Dave. We think Danny White's the best athletic director Tennessee has had in decades. Well, yeah, decades. Those are the three sports in which he did not hire the head coach. He hired it in women's basketball, although he just hired it in women's basketball, to be fair. But he hasn't.
Well, let me ask you this. Are we drawing any conclusions off of that? Because I think the hires have all been solid. Are we just dealing with two sets of hiring the right guys, or are we trying to question whether or not Danny White got lucky with Josh Heupel?
I think every athletic director before Danny White, despite the series of mistakes they all made, all landed one big hire, with the exception of Philip Fulmer. Sorry, Coach Fulmer, but you were the only one who doesn't have a good hire on your resume. But before Fulmer, Dave Hart did land Rick Barnes. Dave Hart made mistake after mistake in a lot of ways, but he got Rick Barnes. That's a big win. John Curry landed Tony Vitello. That was a heck of a hire in the process. Karen Weekly has been at Tennessee. I think Doug Dickey's the one who hired Ralph and Karen Weekly. And Danny White, to be fair, made her full-time head coach after Ralph Weekly retired. But it's not like she was already the head coach of the program. She was the co-head coach. So Danny White didn't really find her. That was a Doug Dickey, or was that a Mike Hamilton hire? I can't remember what Ralph.
It was a Hamilton. Yeah, that was a Hamilton. You know me, I'm a football first guy. So I look at it like this. I'm completely fine with Tennessee being strong in the spring and ending the fiscal year on a high note. Why? Because what is June nowadays? June is the biggest recruiting month. So you've got excitement around your program in a time that most of these kids are worried about the next camp that they're going to go to. Well, they might come home at night and do what? They might see the Diamond Vols on TV. So to me, that exposure, and I think I've told you this before, Terry Fair said he didn't know about Tennessee till he saw the Lady Vols. So this to me is a big, big deal for a lot of sports. I think that baseball gets overpubbed a little bit because there's nothing else going on this time of year as far as college baseball, but it's still pub and it's still out there and people will still watch it. And if your brand is out there, that's a good thing. Portions of the program brought to you by our good friend at Rick Terry Jewelry Design. They want to be your jeweler looking for affordable game day jewelry. How about the Fire Opals, a Tennessee tradition? RickTerryJewelry.com, RickTerryJewelry.com. And we've got news on a big promotion coming up thanks to Rick. So I'll take this year in, year out. If this is your base model of what they have accomplished this year, those four teams, you would have to take it and occasionally hope that the football team is a little bit better or jumps up a little bit over time gradually. But if this is your base model, I would take this because I think it helps you in football in June.
Oh, I think it does too. And it also helps your recruiting budget if you haven't got a lot of interest in the program. Let's call it what it is, because you can actually draw in money. The more money baseball draws in, the less money the football program has to spend to keep them afloat. And that's a huge deal. It's such a big deal to have these programs be self-sustainable if they can. Softball, they're going to have to write a check for softball. But if you have to write a little bit less, that's a big win. And so I think that's a huge part of this, as well as what you're talking about with being relevant in June. And look, I in defense of Danny White also, let's be honest, it's easy to just hire a new baseball coach when just because the program's not winning. You know what I mean? It's easy to hire a men's basketball. You can turn around overnight, quite honestly. Softball's been stable for a while. It's hard to hire a football coach to turn around a program like what he had at Tennessee in 2021 when he had to hire Josh Heupel. That was a disaster of a program that was in gigantic trouble. So that's kind of a big deal. Now, I want to go real quick. This is actually an interesting twist on it from the message boards, Dave, and I usually don't do this, but given the way you prioritize your money and your budget, it is true South Carolina is in the market for a new baseball coach, and they're the most prestigious program in the SEC. If you're Danny White, do you open the checkbook to keep Tony Vitello, or do you say, I can make as good of a hire on a cheap end?
This sounds crazy, but regardless of record, Bobby Cox was extremely successful, right?
Yes.
But he was also beloved by Braves fans. So there's that little bit of innate that you can't put your finger on that Vitello has with the community. And they love him. The ladies think he's gorgeous. The guys think he's super cool. So maybe if it was just Vitello with his success level and not the appeal, then I would say, yes, you could go out and hire another coach to have the same amount of success. But Vitello is like the perfect fit in Knoxville. As far as a coach, I could argue he's as good of a perfect fit as like Philip Fulmer. I mean, he just has slid into this role and become one of the most popular people in East Tennessee.
Yes, he has. And I want to correct it. They have not fired their coach yet. But he's on the hot seat. So they're looking to fire him, South Carolina. So I kind of agree in the sense of, particularly with this baseball, just winning doesn't really, you don't know if that's going to draw people to the stands. You need a little flash and pizzazz, don't you, to make sure people are in the stands? And
yes,
Tony Vitello was putting people in the stands with his flash and pizzazz. So I think that alone makes him worth the money. I totally agree. Saturday Down South basically has an article. I want to give them a shout out. Basically making Tony Vitello the Lane Kiffin of college baseball, which it's kind of funny because of their personalities, because they just rub everybody else in the league, the wrong way. And so, yeah, I think because of that, Tony Vitello may be Danny White. I trust the hire he made with Josh Heupel. And look, you and I both know football's the engine that drives the train. An athletic director is judged by the football hire and nothing else. And Danny White, I think, made the right football hire. But in terms of relative to their sport, Tony Vitello seems like the best hire at this point, doesn't he?
Oh, yeah. I mean, but in retrospect, you had Lane Kiffin that bolted, after years. So that's definitely a little bit different. And leading into this month of June, I know that you're not going to have a situation in which they're going to be on campus. I understand. I think we had a question. I'm not talking about official visitors. I'm just talking about the publicity that you get from being in the College World Series. I don't know how much money that thing generates, but it gets a ton of pub because ESPN's involved with it. And that's the bottom line. So I think that Tennessee will certainly benefit from that. Sports Treasures, carrying over 5 million sports treasures and so much more. Follow on Facebook for the best sports memorabilia. They've got daily updates as well. Go to Sports Treasures TN, Sports Treasures TN. That's Sports Treasures in North Knoxville. And they are nice enough to hook us up with a Tony Vitello autographed baseball. I'll tell you more about how to win that a little bit later in the week, as we've got a lot going on. And Caleb, every once in a while, brings up these topics where I'm like, what the H?
What the? What was he thinking?
Release the hounds.
The Dave Hooker Show.
Keep cool.
A presentation of offthehooksports.com.
What was Tennessee's worst collapse in their athletic history? Now, what the H? Why is Caleb Calhoun asking me that question? Well, there happens to be a tie-in. So give us a quick synopsis of what happened with the Denver Nuggets.
The Denver Nuggets, I was ready to proclaim Nikola Jokic the greatest white player in NBA history, even surpassing Larry Bird, because 3-time MVP, should have won it last year, should have been 4-time MVP, was ready to go win his second title, and just collapsed against the Timberwolves after falling behind 2-0 at home, won 2 on the road, then built a 3-2 lead, then lost by 45 in Game 6, but no matter, they're returning home from Game 7, and they got a 20-point lead against the Timberwolves team led by a 23-year-old Anthony Edwards, and they choke. And they lose in 7 games. And Nikola Jokic totally let me down. I am not now ready to proclaim him the greatest white player of all time. I cannot call him a top 2 center of all time like I was ready to do. So it got me thinking, what are the biggest choke jobs in Tennessee history? Now, when I think choke jobs, I think of 2 things. I don't just think of games that they lost that they should have won, but I think of how costly those losses were in terms of their goals for the season. And Tennessee got a lot of them. And yeah, I am eating so much crow today. I decided, you know what? I'm going to take my anger out on just humiliating other people, which is historic Tennessee sports teams.
There you go. All right. Well, we'll do that. I want to do that, and I want to get into that. But Larry Bird's the best white player ever. Nevertheless, you're going to have a very difficult time talking me out of 2001 LSU, the SEC championship game, as being the biggest choke job in history. And I don't even think you're going to argue that that is the biggest one. But there are 3 others from football that happened earlier before that 2001 that you wanted to point out. 99 Arkansas, 31 Kentucky, and 69 Ole Miss.
Yeah, so I wanted to start with football. So 1999 Arkansas, people forget this. The week of the Arkansas game, despite having lost to Florida earlier in the year and not being likely to win the SEC title, Tennessee made it back up to number 2 in the BCS, ahead of undefeated Virginia Tech. So Tennessee was going to the BCS national championship game if they won out. They lost a road game to the Arkansas Razorbacks. Yes, that's right. They lost a road game to Arkansas, one they never should have lost. I wanted to go through history in 1931 Kentucky. For those who don't know, in 1931, Tennessee was 9-0. They were in the midst of like a 5-year undefeated streak with Neyland. Not 5-year winning all games. They had some ties in there, but they hadn't had a loss. They played Kentucky for a chance to go to their first Rose Bowl ever, a bad Kentucky team, and they tied Kentucky 6-6. That absolutely wrecked them. And then 1969 Ole Miss, Dave, that was the Archie Who game. Tennessee is going to play Ole Miss. They are number 3 undefeated. If they win, they're definitely going to be number 1 and go play for the national title and go be declared national champions. And Steve Kiner says we might as well be playing a bunch of mules in Ole Miss. And they say Archie Who, and Archie leads Ole Miss to a 31-0 win over Tennessee. And yes, I didn't mention this in the email. It was an oversight by my end. I knew it, but I forgot to write it out. 2022 South Carolina. Tennessee's going to the college football playoff if they win that game. Tennessee's up by 21. Tennessee's favored by 21. I'm meeting with Dave on Friday, and I'm saying, you know what? Does South Carolina have a defense? Well, it turns out they didn't have a defense, but the problem was Tennessee had less of a defense, and Spencer Rattler dropped 63 points.
I almost take that in a totally different category. Like it was a collapse, but to me, it's like a travesty that you had a linebacker pitch a fit early in the week, and you had a quarterback suffer an ACL injury. So to me, that's kind of a different category, but it was a collapse. You need to show up and win that game. I don't care if your backup quarterback's playing or who's playing. You got to go out and win that game. There's too much on it. Now, there's been a couple that I've covered in the Sweet 16 in 2000 and 2007. One was against a really, really good team that surprised a lot of people, but Tennessee has definitely stumbled in men's basketball as well.
Yes, quite a few times, actually. So the 2000 Sweet 16 game, there was just no excuse. Tennessee was a 4 seed. The top 3 seeds all ahead of them lost. They're in the Sweet 16 playing 8th seed in North Carolina. This is not your father's or your son's North Carolina. This is post Dean Smith, pre Rory Williams. Okay, a bad North Carolina team. Tennessee's up by 9 with 10 minutes to go in the second half. And you brought up how they bring in Julius Peppers to just out-rebound them all the time. And also Jerry Green decides, hey, let's jack up a bunch of threes with 25 seconds left on the shot clock every time we had the ball on offense. And Tennessee blows that game, blows a chance at the Final Four. 2007, they were not the better team than Ohio State, but they had built a 20-point lead. You've got to hold that lead. And They blow that lead and lose, and that was a chance to go to their first Elite Eight. Another men's basketball one was 2018, the Sister Jean Loyola Chicago game, which everybody in Knoxville just can't stand Sister Jean. I feel like even Knoxville Catholic kids decided to convert to Protestant after that. Okay,
why do they hate Sister Jean?
Because Tennessee should have beaten Loyola Chicago. They blew that game. They lost on a last-second shot to an 11-seed Loyola Chicago, and the path was clear to a Final Four run. Everybody in the next rounds was going to be a lower seed. Tennessee had a clear path to the Final Four, but couldn't get past 11-seed Loyola Chicago, who made the Final Four run. That was probably Barnes' worst choke job. You could argue 2022 Michigan. You could argue 2019 Purdue. But 2018, Sister Jean, Loyola Chicago, should not have happened. That just was an embarrassment.
We can't hate a nun. We can't hate a nun. There's some more collapses brought to you by our good buddy Don Self at State Farm right there in Collegedale and Ottawa, and he will take care of you. Customer service. There'll be no collapse when you need your claim because he will take care of you. Everybody wants to save money, and I get that, shopping prices, but go to donself.net right below donself.net. And you can call him at 423-396-2126, 423-396-2126. Now, you got a couple of the spring sports in there. You have the 2007 Softball College World Series. I'm assuming that was the year of the Monica Abbott, right?
Monica Abbott's pitching a perfect tournament. I'm gonna depart from you here in just a little bit. I did not think that year, and I actually got into that team, that they were the best team in the College World Series. No, Arizona had better run support. But you would have thought Monica was pitching such a perfect series. She pitched a perfect first game, pitched a no-hit shutout, threw like 3 extra innings in the second game. All Tennessee has to do is score 1 run. 1 run, and they win the game. And they couldn't buy 1 run. That's why it was a choke. The other spring sport, the 2022 NCAA baseball tournament, best team, #1 throughout the year, talking so much trash, the bat flips and everything like that. And then they lose the super regional to Notre Dame, don't even get to the College World Series. And then we got to talk about 1999 women's basketball. 1997-98 Lady Vols is the greatest team of all time. Samika Randall, Tamika Catching, Samika Holtzclaw. They go undefeated. They win the national title. Everybody is back next year. It's Shamika Holtzclaw's senior year. They're in the Elite 8. And this was the biggest reason I had to put Candace Parker ahead of Shamika Holtzclaw on my all-time list. Shamika Holtzclaw has her worst shooting performance at Tennessee in that 1999 Elite 8 as Tennessee loses to Duke. It was the ultimate choke job. The Lady Vols never should have lost that game. In terms of talent disparity chokes, that's probably the biggest. But because of the importance of the sport, I can't ignore 2001 LSU. 2001 LSU was just an absolute travesty.
Yep. It's tough to top that one. And I'm curious if really don't think there's any common thread among all those collapses, except they were wearing orange. And I bet if you went down any other college athletic department, you could find similar collapses, right? I don't think this is an inordinate amount of collapses when we're talking about over the past 50 years in all 4 of the major sports.
No, and to be fair, at different times, I'm sure
they just hurt. That 2001 game still hurts. I would have been in LA for 4 days. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, the 2001 game it's actually kind of the reverse of the 2023 South Carolina game, because the 2001 game, Tennessee lost because LSU's quarterback got hurt. And John Chavis didn't know how to adjust in a game for a backup quarterback. Whereas they lost the 2022 game because Hendon Hooker got hurt, which I just want to stick on that for a second, Dave. Maybe I'm crazy, but I know they were only down 49. I know they were down by 3 scores in the fourth quarter. But didn't you feel that if Hendon Hooker had stayed healthy, they still would have come back and won that game?
I thought that it was very doable. I thought they were not out of it whatsoever. I've heard a couple of people say they are going to come back and win. I'm not going that I would predict it, but I would call it a 50-50 shot, which if you looked at the score should be what? 80-20 that you're not going to come back. So yeah, I felt like they could come back. I felt like they played flat. I felt like it's a team that has shown they can put a bad half behind them. They can also put a good half behind them, for that matter. So, yeah, I don't. When I look at the greatest collapses, I have trouble with Monica Abbott. I have trouble with that North Carolina team because I don't even think that they know. They knew that they had Julius Peppers coming off the bench. Remember, Brandon Hayward got hurt. So, to me, the biggest one would still have to be 2001. LSU in football. I'm having trouble coming up with a close second other than perhaps the North Carolina game. Now, in all reality, a couple of these come before I was alive. So, but I will say that North Carolina game being in person, Caleb, that it felt like Tennessee had that one. And Brendan Hayward got in foul trouble, and he ended up being a good NBA player. It's not like they were better without him. But Julius Peppers was a much tougher matchup, and they just could not handle that.
Yeah, that was – I understood why they couldn't handle the Julius Peppers matchup. I think the problem was if Tennessee has a competent coach at that time, they're running their offense and they're not relying on the three-point shot constantly at the end. You know, that's why Julius Peppers got so many rebounds, because they kept missing threes.
Long rebounds too. As a matter of fact, I can visualize him catching those 10, 12-foot rebounds that come off long shots. So yeah, he was all over the court. And man, he was one of the most impressive athletes I've ever seen in person. I will say that. We continue the countdown to the most important Vols, and we are at a guy named after an animal. I bet you know who that is. How important is Squirrel White? We shall discuss. By the way, Feed the Faith Outdoors just posted. Hit like and subscribe. As a matter of fact, if you could hit subscribe today and you haven't yet, that would be fantastic, because we're pushing 5,000. It's a big deal for us. We're like at 4,994, I believe. So we would love to hit that at some point today. Hit the like and subscribe button. Squirrel White, what you need to know about him after 60 seconds from our good friend Banks and Jones. Well, it's because they're Tennessee's trial attorney. You can play to win with Banks and Jones because they'll go to trial. You've heard of other lawyers. They say they'll go to trial and fight for you. They won't. They just want to settle. That's the easiest way out. Well, that's not Banks and Jones, led by T. Scott Jones. They won't settle. They'll go to trial for you. Tennessee's trial attorney. They play to win. Truly, Tennessee's trial attorney when it comes to criminal defense or personal injury. Why settle? It's Banks and Jones. T. Scott Jones. BanksandJones.com. On offthehooksports.com, we've been counting down the most important players heading into the 2024 football season. Now, we're at a guy named after an animal, Squirrel White. You know who that is. Give us an update of where we've counted down to this point and where we rank Squirrel White in the most important football balls heading into summer camp.
So we've done Javonte Spraggins, John Campbell Jr., Amari Thomas, Brew McCoy, and Ricky Gibson III as our bottom 5 of the top 10. And now we are in the top half, starting with Squirrel White at number 5.
I had one of those moments where I wondered if Squirrel White should be even higher, because you and I believe Dante Thornton's going to slide out to the outside wide receiver, right?
Correct.
So that means you've got to have the slot guy. It's not Dante come in for Squirrel, who was a sophomore last year, and provide immediate help. It's somebody has to step in there and do something now. And you don't have a transfer coming in. So if you're sliding Dante to the outside, and by the way, I keep hearing things about Dante Thornton about how he is going to have a fantastic year and erase some of the disappointment of last season. But if you're moving him to the outside, you better have a guy like a Jalen Hyatt that can create things from the slot receiver position, because I think we all learned in 2022 that's what makes this football team good.
No, yes, absolutely. That's a huge part of it. And even 2021, I mean, we all forget this. It's because Jalen Hyatt won the Biletnikoff. He made everybody forget about how crucial Velus Jones was in the 2021 season to what was happening. So Squirrel White showed a ton of promise in 2022. I mean, he in mop-up duty, he had 481 yards and 2 touchdowns. And, you know, they were talking about him like he had a disappointing year last year. He still had 67 catches for 803 yards. So It's not like he wasn't a crucial part of the offense. It's just there were a lot of other extenuating factors. I think because of the injuries at receiver, a lot more got put on Squirrel White than is meant to be put on him because he's a slot receiver. And I think that, combined with some of the issues in the way that they ran the offense, limited what he's able to do. Look, Squirrel White was key on those long screens that Tennessee had to run consistently. They are not going to have to run those as much. So I think this year you're going to look at a guy who can get back into his regular system and can be an explosive deep threat. Again, if the wideouts are doing their jobs on the outside, Squirrel White should have a chance to be another Biletnikoff winner, because how many times is he going to be open down the field with his speed, given what he can do and given how this offense is set up?
Yep, and I like his ability. You're right. You pull up those stats. He didn't have a disappointing year last year, especially the fact that we're going to hold Josh Heupel responsible for this to some extent. He thought Dante Thornton was the guy over Squirrel White to start the season, despite what Squirrel had done the year before. So some of that falls at Josh Heupel's feet. If Dante Thornton, here's my thinking. The projection was Thornton maybe more physically gifted long term. So by the end of the year, he's a better football player. But at the beginning, I'm not sure Tennessee shouldn't have started the season with Squirrel White at slot. And if they do that, then I don't know that Dante Thornton ever gets a real opportunity. So you're darned if you do, darned if you don't. But I got to question a little bit Josh Heupel's decision to hand over the slot keys to Dante Thornton when Squirrel White had proven he could drive it just fine.
Between that and Joe Milton, we have to ask a real question, Dave. Does Josh Heupel fall in love with the measurables of a player more than the actual production of a player?
I don't know that it's measurables, but I do think he could be perhaps overly allegiant to players. And whether it is, I think he was incredibly loyal to Hendon Hooker after he got the job. He wasn't going to put him in because he wasn't going to put Joe Milton back in because he saw what Hendon Hooker could do. So I think there's a loyalty. I don't know that it's specifically tied to measurables as far as how high you can jump, how far you can throw the ball. It might be, but I don't know that. But certainly Joe Milton would seem to be that case.
Well, what does that say then? I mean, in a positive way about Squirrel White's character, though, because I would sit there and say, I've been producing for you. I'm the proven one. You try to force in a guy because of his measurables ahead of me. And I mean, he could have easily given the middle finger and said, I'm going to go somewhere else. And so I think, but he didn't. He stayed to try to prove his job. And I think that's a very good sign for a guy like Squirrel White, because look, let's call it what it is. More than any other position. And you can't even blame them for it because they're in competition for touches, but receivers are probably the biggest divas of any position, right? They kind of have to be.
Yes.
They want the ball. And so for Squirrel White to accept that and to still do a lot for Tennessee last year, which he did, he actually probably had the most consistent hands for Tennessee last year, and he's not even a possession receiver. And that says a lot about, he basically said, if I lost this job to Dante, I'm going to go win it back. I'm going to go out and prove that I belong in the slot. And I'm going to work my tail off in a way that I think, honestly, unlike Jalen Hyatt, I'm not knocking Jalen Hyatt on this, although it was a little bit negative, but it doesn't seem like Squirrel White has ever had the issue of, I need to turn it on now because, scouts are looking. It seems like he's always had it turned on and ready to go. Hasn't he?
Yes. And if you remember, he had a fantastic fall camp last year. So he did have 800 yards receiving. That's a little bit more than I thought he did. But I think a lot of people thought he was going to have a huge monstrous year, not only because of his freshman year, but because of what he did in preseason camp. He was a standout in preseason camp. I mean, he did incredibly well. I kind of thought it might push Dante Thornton on the back burner, but that wasn't the case, and they didn't want to do that. Portions of the program brought to you by our good friends at the Hemp House, the premier hemp dispensary online with a wide variety, great selection, and strict standards to ensure you only receive the best in CBD or Delta products. Go to hemphousechat.com, hemphousechat.com, or use the promo code HOOKED. That's HOOKED for 10% off. All that being said, do you expect that Squirrel White will be Tennessee's leading receiver this year, as Jalen Hyatt was from the slot? That's pretty unusual. Most offenses don't produce most of their passing yardage out of the slot. But do you think that Tennessee will be in that position this year, or you just let things play out how they might play out?
Oh, yeah, I think Squirrel White's going to be the leading receiver. I think Squirrel White is going – I said this. Squirrel White's going to lead in yards. Brew McCoy is going to lead in receptions. I don't know who's going to lead in touchdowns for receiving, but Squirrel White's going to lead in yards and Brew McCoy is going to lead in receptions, is the way I think this year is going to play out. And then I think on the other side, we spoke with Cole Kublik last week. He's high on Chris Brazel. What you're hearing in practice is Dante Thornton. My projection is Mike Matthews. I don't know which one of those is going to win the other wideout spot, but we know Brew McCoy and Squirrel White are going to be starting as the top wideout of the slot guy, assuming they're both healthy.
Okay, you mentioned the X factor, Brazel. Okay, so people are saying on the message board that you want to see Boo Carter lined up with Thornton, McCoy, and Squirrel, and that sounds great. Sounds really cool. How about you go 5 wide with a Brazel? Because I don't think Boo Carter, he's pretty busy trying to figure out the safety position. I don't think he's going to be playing a lot of receiver, but I think you've got a guy in Brazel who's impressed the coaches to the point in which I believe that he's going to be a major factor, some shape, form, or fashion. Does that take away from one of the outside receivers in Brew, or does it take away from Dante, or does that take away from Squirrel? I'm not sure, but he does need to be a factor if we're divvying up yardage and catches and that sort of thing.
He does. He absolutely does need to be a factor. And I think that Brazel, no, actually, I'm pushing back. I don't know if he does need to be a factor. Look, Heupel, I think Heupel's offense works.
Need or will.
I don't think he needs to be a factor. I think Heupel's offense works best. I'm sorry.
How about will? You don't say needs to be, but will he be?
I can't say if he will or not because I don't know who's going to get that other wideout spot. But I only think 3 receivers need to be a factor in Josh Heupel's system for his offense to work. And we've seen that time and time again. You need the dictate coverage wideout. You need the possession wideout. And then you need the slot guy that gets the big yards. And you have Brew McCoy and Squirrel White as the dictate coverage and slot guy. Chris Brazel does sound like he's the possession guy. From everything I've heard, he's got the best hands of those other wideouts, right? Mike Matthews, Chris Brazel, and Dante Thornton. So maybe because of that, he actually takes the other wideout spot, which pushes Matthews and Thornton to the back burner. But then again, you're hearing a lot of good things about Dante Thornton, so who knows? I mean, it's Dave, if you got a BMW and a Lambo in your front yard, you can only drive one. I mean,
that's fair.
If you got 5 mansions, you can only be in one at one time. So I mean, I think sometimes, like, you're gonna have to make a sacrifice. There's one guy that's really good on this team that's just not going to play a lot this year, quite honestly. And I think it's going to be 2 guys because I think Heupel needs to go, and I think maybe Thornton and Matthews are the receivers next year.
Well, now wait a second. Let's go back to that 2022 team. Who are the 3 receivers?
Because Cedric Tillman got hurt, it became Brew McCoy, Ramel Keaton, and Jalen Hyatt. Had Cedric Tillman not gotten hurt, it would have been Brew McCoy, Cedric Tillman, Jalen Hyatt.
Wait. 2022.
That's what I was saying. Yeah, 2022.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Brew came in. Okay, so it ended up being the production came from Brew, Ramel,
and Hyatt.
Squirrel. Or Hyatt, excuse me. Brew, Ramel, Hyatt. But Cedric Tillman would have had a significant year had he not gotten hurt. He would have.
At which point, Ramel Keaton would not have been producing.
True. I wonder, though, there's an X and a wide receiver. I wonder if Josh Heupel is comfortable switching out receivers a little bit more often now that he has some depth. When you look at that 2022 team, I think they had 3 guys when Tillman got hurt. I think now they have more guys. So how do they handle it now that they have more guys? That would be my question.
I think they still handle it with 3. I think, and I think where this every bit of proof I've seen throughout most of history is even with advanced offenses, you want a select group of receivers if you want a championship team. Now, Urban Meyer and the spread that he ran with Tim Tebow is a different story, but most of the time, you pick 2 to 3. And I can go from the pro style with David Cutcliffe. As you remember, Dave, remember when he took back over in 2006 for Randy Sanders and he said, we're running too many receivers. We're going to have 3. And he said, you're going to have Robert Meacham, Jason Swain, Brett Smith. That's it. Nobody else. And Robert Meacham is going to be the go-to guy. None of this 5 wide set to try to get players going. Then what happened? Remember when Nick Saban and Lane Kiffin adopted elements of the spread to the Alabama offense?
Dude.
And did you ever notice that they always just had one receiver that they really focused on, from Amari Cooper to Henry Ruggs to Devontae Smith? It was always one receiver. And I think Saban understood that. David Cutcliffe understood that. Lane Kiffin understands that. I think Josh Heupel understands that too. There's very few where you spread the ball around a lot. Hugh Freeze kind of runs that offense where I want like 5 receivers and I want them all to get equal touches. But I don't think that's going to work for Heupel's offense, particularly when the offense is so much about getting into a rhythm and running tempo that it's just hard when you're rotating in and out receivers.
Well, and you can't do it during drives with this offense. So
Yeah, you can.
You would be talking about from drive to drive. We want to be real clear on that. So don't want to create any sort of confusion. I'm not sure that athletes should be required to go to school anymore. I know that sounds absolutely insane, but we've already changed everything else. Why are these guys going to class? They don't need to go to class. We'll discuss that and more in exactly 2 minutes. Stay tuned. Hit the like and subscribe button. We're pushing 5,000. We're super excited. So like 4 away. So hit the button with Caleb Calhoun. I'm Dave Hooker, Off the Hook Sports.
Wheel drive, 31,954. 24 Ford Edge, all-wheel drive, 37,975. 24 F-250 4x4 Crew Cab, 54,760. Ray Varner Ford, your East Tennessee Ford dealership.
Sports Treasures in North Knoxville is one of the South's largest sports cards and memorabilia dealers, featuring over 10 million sports cards from vintage to modern. Sports Treasures carries a full line of hobby boxes, singles, autographed memorabilia, Tennessee Vol collectibles, fan cave decorations, and so much more. See a museum full of collectibles at Sports Treasures, 4819 North Broadway in Fountain City, and Sports Treasures on Facebook. Sports Treasures, where the real sports fan goes to shop.
Have you seen the latest TriStar Hats Co. product?
TriStar Hats Co.? What's that?
You know, those really cool hats, shirts, tumblers, and even license plates with 3 stars like the official Tennessee flag and stripes like the American flag. Pretty patriotic if you ask me.
Ah, gotcha. Seen those. Those are cool. Where can I get them?
Simple. TriStarHatsCo.com. And if you order now, there's 10% on any order $50 or more. Plus, use the promo code HOOKED.
With the promo code HOOKED, you get 10% off. That's hooked.
And don't forget free shipping with any order over $50. Stock up at TriStarHatsCo.com. That's TriStarHatsCo.com. There are plenty of wannabes out there, so make sure you go to TriStarHatsCo.com for the best quality and customer service.
Will do, and I'll be sure to use the promo code HOOKED. That's hooked when I do, to save an additional 10% off. TriStarHatsCo.com.
TriStar Hats Co. is a trademark of TriStar Hats Co. LLC. Any use without express written consent is prohibited.
Now in its 45th year, the second and third generations continue Joe Newbert's commitment.
His vision of what this business needed to be, we still try to live up to that.
Joe Newbert Collision Center.
The Dave Hooker Show, represented by Banks and Jones, Tennessee's trial attorneys.
Excuse me, Your Honor.
Play to win, banksjones.com.
Who's this guy?
Hello, wizard.
The Dave Hooker Show,
Who?
a presentation of Off the Hook Sports,
What?
YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and the free Off the Hook Sports app. Back to Dave Hooker.
Travis said on the message board, I, for one, hope Squirrel has a breakthrough year. That's who we just talked about in our countdown of most important balls heading into the football season. You know, but with what Travis just told us, it's not really a breakthrough year. Maybe this is going to be way before your time, but do you remember a Miami receiver named Kelvin Martin? Does anybody remember that? He played for Miami in college, and he was the Dallas Cowboys slot receiver with Alvin Harper and Michael Irvin. Look that up. Look up Kelvin.
Martin was his name?
Kelvin Martin. I know it's before your time. It's early 90s, but they're the same guy. They're really exciting as the same guy. But Kelvin Martin was a guy that was just consistently good. Had those 600 to 800 years. Maybe Squirrel's just
800 yards, you mean? 600 to 800 yards?
Yeah, 600 to 800 years. I mean, nobody's going to turn down that. If you go to an NFL team, you got a receiver that's going to catch 600 to 800 yards for 6 to 8 years. You would take that, right?
Yeah, no, I think that's a very big advantage. Now, here's where you could actually see Dante Thornton work his way in. By the way, I thought about this, and it might be a little bit different, but say Tennessee only has one tight end emerge. Then they could go to the 4 wide receiver sets, like every other drive. Like they could do one drive with one tight end and one drive with 4 wide receivers, because when you have the 4 wide receivers, if you have Brazel and Thornton, what do you have? You got Brew McCoy, the dictate coverage receiver, Squirrel White, the slot receiver, Dante Thornton, the Alvin Harper style breakaway speed, just run down, run a vertical, right? and then Chris Brazel, the possession one. So I think that could be a factor going forward. And maybe Thornton actually starts over Brazel because of the fact that what if the tight end, when they're running the tight ends, what if the tight end is your possession receiver? Do you really need Brazel at that point?
Fair. Elias making fun of me. Starting at wide receiver, number 81, Methuselah. Yes, I definitely meant 600 to 800 yards instead of 600 to 800 years. Makes it sound like I've got a terrible accent. Are you going to play 600 to 800 years? Yards? All right, so let's go ahead and get to my thoughts on a significant development that you probably missed over the weekend. That was Derek Barnett got his degree from the University of Tennessee. And I say kudos to Derek Barnett, and I think it's a reminder that you need to change NIL, and you need to change the current setup of players and student athletes, and it needs one more major change, and that is they don't have to go to school. They don't have to go to class. They don't have to go to tutoring sessions. They have that 3 or 4 years to focus on football. Now, Caleb, I want you to play devil's advocate, okay? Tell me I'm wrong. Give me reasons that traditional logic would say, Dave, that's insane.
Traditional logic, I mean, and I want to say this up front, I'm playing devil's advocate here because it's hard for me to disagree with Dave. But like traditional logic is you're supposed to look out for the best interest of the student athletes, and most of them will not be going to the NFL. So to tell them not to go to class when they're in college is really setting them back if they don't graduate and they don't make it into the NFL. And it's also it's at that point it takes away what is even the point of it being college football or college sports. Why not just create a minor league team that is totally separate from college sports at that point? Are they really representing your university that you're a fan of?
And Travis says, here's another traditional logic, and I want to address all of these. Travis says, if they don't go to class, this is now the UFL. No one will care. Do you think that matters, or do you think people care that they go to Philosophy 101 or that they show up on Saturdays with an orange jersey?
I mean, I think the latter, but the question becomes, do you really feel like that it's your school that's going to win championships when those players aren't even students at your class, students at your school?
Well, but I think the vast majority of Tennessee fans didn't graduate from the University of Tennessee, so I don't think they're going to hold it against them.
No, that's a fair point. I mean, you make it look. I play devil's advocate. You put me in a corner because you're.
Well, I was hoping you'd go along those lines. You talk about set them back. Well, Derek Barnett had a great NFL career. He was allowed to come back. That's the thing that I preach from the mountaintops that so many people don't hear. The University of Tennessee will pay for that athlete to come back and go to college. So Derek Barnett could have paid. He made millions of dollars in the NFL. Travis, I see it. It's a disconnect from your fans, and I think there's some truth to that because ultimately that's the crux of the issue. It is would that create a disconnect with the fans? Because there's not a taking advantage of the players argument. Remember, Linda Benzel-Myers tried to say that all of Tennessee's players were taking urban studies because it was easy. But then she forgot to point out the fact that they may get a worthless degree, but they can come back and get 10 degrees, and it's paid for if they want to. So the argument that you're not setting them up best for success, I think is moot. And I think it's just darn wrong because setting up for success would be your long shot first when you're in your late teens and early 20s, and that's the NFL, right? And then you fill in the gaps if that doesn't happen. So I know we're on the same page here, but Travis did make me second guess my stance. Quite frankly, is it a disconnect from the fans? I don't know that it would be, but it would be for a lot of graduates. And I think it would be for me to some extent.
Well, let's think about this because we want to worry about the future of the student athletes. And I want what's best for the student athletes. Right now, we have a situation where we've all been in here. We've all been in a situation where we decided we wanted to do something at 19 or 20. And at 30, or 29, we wish we did something else, but we're so knee deep in our career climbing in this that we kind of stick with it. You've done that, Dave, right? You second guess yourself a little bit, but you're like, I'm so far down this road, I don't really want to change at my age. And
Right.
this gives them the option to do that. So we're not forcing them to pick a career at 19 when they're playing football. Here's the other part, guys. These athletes, they can't major in certain things because of football when they're on campus. They can't. So you're asking them, for the sake of their degree to fall back on, to take a useless degree that they're not even going to have a lot of time to study for, because let's be honest, during football season, they're focused on football. I mean, and everything about them is focused on football. Actually, not even just during football season, the whole year, because when it's not football season, it's winter workouts. When it's not winter workouts, it's spring practice. When it's not spring practice, it's summer workouts. They never really get a chance to fully focus on class. So I have always thought this was a great compromise. You come play for the university, and here's a way you could really make it good, Dave. You finish with the university. Like, what I mean by finish, I don't mean graduate. I mean letter. You have to letter for a minimum amount of years. What, like 3?
Oh, you can't transfer.
Can't transfer. And if you letter for 3 years, the university will hold your scholarship and allow you to come back for class whenever you want to graduate, and at any point in your life.
Which is what they do.
Yeah, that's exactly what they do, and it's what they should do. So what's the point on requiring them to go to class when they're there for football? Y'all can hate me for saying this. Y'all can hate Cardell Jones, who said this at Ohio State back in 2014 when he tweeted out, "Why should we go to classes if we're here to play football? Classes are pointless." You can pretend all day that these players are at these schools for classes. They're not. Half of them would not be at the school were it not for football, okay? So I think allow them to focus on football. Allow them to try their career in football. If it doesn't work, they come back, they get a degree, and even if it's in their mid-20s, that means they've been in the NFL for a few years, so they got some good money at that point. Okay, but if they don't get drafted, they can come right back to college and do whatever. What I would a compromise, Dave, I would say, make them take all basic electives. You know, like before you pick a major, you have to take all your electives, and require them to take basic level electives in college while they're at Tennessee.
I'm saying not go at all. Now, I want to Travis on the message board has some really good points. So what would be next, an age limit or eligibility? That's a very good question. I haven't worked that far out yet. Would it just be the same as eligibility, or would it be, as far as age limit and coming back to get your degree? No, you could be 70 years old and I wouldn't have a problem with that.
Yeah, you can come back whenever. People go back to school all the time in their 40s and 50s to go get a degree. This isn't a big deal. Like, not everybody gets a degree at 22, 23, or 24. And they, and so again, I just think that I think your focus should be on football. So that way it's best for their academic future, because that way they're not letting football get in the way of their academic future. So, you know, Elias brings up a point. You're worried about creating a situation where guys who do want to go to class and get their degree end up being pressured by coaches to quit wasting their time in class.
That will happen.
Elias, that happens already. That's already happening. There are players who are told they can't major in things because it conflicts with their football degree. So, I mean,
I still don't know how Josh Dobbs got an aerospace engineering degree, and good for him. But would it really, I mean, given that he's been successful in the NFL by hanging around, would it have behooved him to focus more on football and maybe be just a little bit better of an NFL prospect when he went to the NFL?
And he always could have come back for that degree too.
That's my point.
Yeah,
That's
no,
make
I totally
football
agree.
a major. Fred, I agree. Take investment classes. Take when you go. I mean, I've seen the schedules. They're like 10 hours a day. But when you go to some of those things, I think that it should count. When you're going to team meetings and when you're going to some of those things, they should, they should count as a class. I've got no problem with that. By the way, we posted that on our YouTube page. So what's our poll question? Let's reset the poll question. Let's go ahead and get that out there because it is on the YouTube page, brought to you by our friends at Quality Tire Pro. The Eberle family has been serving Chattanooga's community since 1957. All major brands of tires, full service automotive, brake alignments, oil changes, and more. All work covered by the nationwide warranty. They're right there on Cherokee Boulevard in Chattanooga. Stop by and tell Bo that Off the Hook Sports said hello. All right, Caleb. Where do we stand? Because I haven't looked on purpose and I have no idea, but I'm going to predict 65% say they should have to still go to class.
76% say they should. 24% say no, it's a business now. So only 24% agree with us.
That's not unusual for few people to agree with us. So that's understandable. I know that it is drastic, but 10 years ago, paying players seemed pretty drastic. 10 years ago, a college football playoff of 12 to 14 teams seemed pretty drastic. So don't think that it can change. So it definitely can. Chaz Lanier making some news as he enjoys doing. Hit that like and subscribe button. We're pushing 5,000 subscribers, so certainly excited about that. Be a part of the crew. We want you to hit that like and subscribe button as soon as you can, and we'll be back with you soon. Less than 2 minutes, as a matter of fact, to give you the latest on Chaz Lanier. Stay tuned. Caleb Calhoun, Dave Hooker, Off the Hook Sports.
5th year, the second and third generations continue Joe Newbert's commitment.
His vision of what this business needed to be, we still try to live up to that. If we wouldn't put our family in it, we're not going to put their family in it. If you're going to say that you're doing the best work in Knoxville, now saying it's one thing, producing it and providing it's another.
The largest family-owned collision center in Knoxville is Joe Newbert Collision Center.
Hi, I'm Rick Terry, and we at Rick Terry Jewelry Designs pride ourselves in the highest quality craftsmanship from a family-owned business here in Knoxville for over 35 years. At Rick Terry Jewelry Designs, we also take pride in being an affordable option for all your game day accessories, especially those fire opals. At Rick Terry Jewelry Designs, we want to be your jeweler every day and especially on game day. Go Vols!
Hi, Mike Davis here with City Heating and Air, reminding you to always dare to compare. Our team provides quality local heating and air service, installation, and maintenance across East Tennessee. We use only the best equipment like American Standard heating and air conditioning for your residential, new construction, or commercial needs. Honesty, dependability, and customer satisfaction have been the cornerstones of our business since 1961. City Heat and Air.
Dare to compare.
Experience it all at Varner Ford in Clinton. Need a quick fix or maintenance? Visit our Quick Lane Tire and Auto Center. Keep your Ford running smoothly with the experts in our service department. Ready for your next Ford? Our sales team is here to guide you to this 24 Ford Escape all-wheel drive, $31,954. 24 Ford Edge all-wheel drive, $37,975. 24 F-250 4x4 Crew Cab, $54,760. Local you trust, experience you can afford. Varner Ford, your East Tennessee Ford dealership.
The Dave Hooker Show, represented by Banks & Jones, Tennessee's trial attorneys. Play to win, banksjones.com.
Who's this guy?
Hello, wizard.
The Dave Hooker Show,
Who?
a presentation of Off the Hook Sports,
What?
YouTube, Apple, Spotify, and the free Off the Hook Sports app. Back to Dave Hooker.
All right, Crystal says on the message board, you got to show your face around campus. The players would still be around campus and they'd be at the athletic facilities. Joe says we're talking about students not going to class anymore, or football players not going to class. Classes are offered to all students. Do you want 50 non-football players in team meetings? Elias says I totally would have tried to prank my advisor by bringing up wanting to change my major to football. Simple fact is you just got to be accepted to that school. I mean, you have not the school, the University of Tennessee. You have to be accepted to get an aerospace engineering postgraduate degree, Caleb. So you just wouldn't accept them into football. You don't want 50 non-football players in your team meetings, but I don't think that's going to happen.
No, that's not going to happen.
The same way, like, Gibbs Hall used to be the athletic dorm, and it was a lot nicer. Well, everybody applied to go to Gibbs Hall, but nobody got in unless you were a football player.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly. They kept the facade. And by the way, guys, what you're asking for, I'm just going to tell you guys honestly, What you're asking for is the university to keep up a facade that is total BS, and we all know it. And okay, because what you're really asking is that just so you can feel good about them being class, that they do what North Carolina does, which is let's create fake majors with fake classes so they all make the grades so they can play basketball. That's what the schools are doing now. Okay, is that really student athletes when you major in a useless major created by the school for them to easily get A's in so they can be eligible to play sports?
Well, that's pretty much what Tennessee did with urban studies. I don't know why.
Exactly.
So, I don't know why North Carolina caught the heat more than Tennessee a little bit earlier. I guess it was just timing or whatever evidence was available. What is the latest on our poll question? Still 76% say you have to go to class.
80. It's now at 80. People are actually believing that these players are student athletes. Like, oh my God, they go to class and we care about what they do in class and yada, yada, yada. No, you don't. No,
Crystal says, don't embarrass UT by offering football as a major, in my opinion. Respect that opinion, and I see where you're coming from. Crystal says our football players our celebrities, they need to make appearances outside of Neyland Stadium. They're going to do so because the NIL money is going to have them at car dealerships and out in the community pretty frequently. So I think those are something there's some things that will motivate players to get someplace to a car dealership and make appearances if they have to make, if they make $5,000 for showing up. And the numbers are getting kind of that bizarre, question. By the way, Caleb.
And I'm genuinely asking the message board who feels this way. So do you really feel that much better that when they were playing football for your school, they were majoring in a useless major and walking away with a useless degree that won't serve them purpose anywhere in life? That really makes you feel better? Like, oh, at least they get to be counted as student athletes then. Like, you really think, like, that's what you're fighting for here, because that's what most of them are doing when they're at Tennessee. Or any school. I'm not just picking on Tennessee. That's every school.
Derek says, I think by going to class, you're teaching responsibility. Good point. Idle time is the devil's playground. Great point. Smoky Mountain Red says, I firmly believe. Yep. I firmly believe if we win, no one cares. I believe that too. So Chaz Lanier is a Tennessee prospect that appears to be opening up his recruitment a little bit as BYU has stepped into the chase for him. What can you tell us about Chaz Lanier?
So Chaz Lanier, it sounded like Tennessee was in the lead for a while. He was testing his NBA draft waters. He's a transfer from North Florida. And it seemed like if he wasn't going to the NBA, Tennessee was the easy favorite to land him. And then Kentucky got into play with Mark Pope. And now BYU, Mark Pope's former school, has gotten into play. Kentucky, Chaz Lanier is visiting Kentucky today. So it sounds like a lot of people think that he's leaning towards Kentucky, but he is also going to be visiting BYU, I believe, later this week. So Chaz Lanier is really looking at different things. Oh, and his Instagram story yesterday had him in Provo, which is in Utah. So he's actually, I take that back, already visited BYU. So he's visited BYU and he's visited Kentucky. I think he's going to make a decision very soon. I can't imagine it not being down to Tennessee and Kentucky, quite honestly, if he's trying to do what he wants to do.
Well, here's the scary part, though. And this used to happen in recruiting. When you'd say a guy suddenly opened up his recruitment or changed his mind, you always thought that he got an under-the-table offer. Now, they're not under the table anymore. But if BYU wants to make itself look good after losing their coach, and they've got a pile of cash sitting around, dropping it on Lanier would be significant. And so that to me, I take all my allegiances to either Tennessee or Kentucky and throw him out the door. I think he's a guy that's looking for the best deal. And if BYU says $1 million and Tennessee says $500,000, I think he's going to BYU.
You think if Tennessee says $1 million and BYU says $500,000? I
said that backwards.
Oh, okay.
If BYU says $1 million and Tennessee says $500,000, I think he's shopping himself right now. And that's not a knock. Okay, shop yourself. Tennessee may have slipped in there and got you before you realized how much you were worth. Well, now you know how much you're worth. So go get what you're worth.
Well, here's the thing. He's doing two things. He's shopping himself, yes. But I still think he's going to make the decision of what he thinks is best for his future. But why not, in the process of doing that, opening up your recruitment so you force schools you can leverage yourself to get more NIL money? There's no harm in that whatsoever. and for the play from your perspective.
Agree.
So
he comes
that
back to
doesn't mean
Tennessee and says BYU offered me X. Can you offer me X? And I'm in.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe even Tennessee offers less, but he says, okay, but Tennessee, now they offer me less than BYU, but they offer me more than they initially did, and it's enough for me to come here and it's best for my future. So there's a lot in play here. Now, Kentucky now has 11 scholarships filled. They just filled their 11th scholarship over the weekend with another transfer. So it's hard for me to believe that he would pick Kentucky outside of anything but the lure of prestige. I don't know if Kentucky has the NIL money to offer to him right now, the way that he expects. BYU may, because BYU maybe open up the checkbook just for him. But I can't imagine those two schools being able to offer that much more than Tennessee has on the NIL front. And so I think that's where this is a bit tricky. Look, I know people are excited. This is not my Boo Carter prediction from last November, but I still think he ends up at Tennessee. I'm going to tell you guys, I think he ends up at Tennessee. I think he sees Tennessee, he sees what Barnes did with Dalton Connect last year, and he says, man, I could be a starter right now in this system and become a star. And so I think he's leaning Tennessee because of that.
Well, as far as big pickups, where would you rate this from a scale of 1 to 10? A 10 in retrospect was Dalton Connect. So I think this guy's supposed to be of that similar ilk, but I'm not willing to go there. So I'll say 7.5, 8.
I'm going to lean 7. And the only reason is there's something that stands out if you only break out like your last year. You know, he wasn't a double figure scorer until this past year. However, Dalton Connect was a late bloomer. So sometimes he would just emerge late. I mean, for those who don't know, Scottie Pippen was, I think, the water guy for Arkansas State, wasn't he? Or Central Arkansas, wherever he was at. He was like the water boy and grew 6 inches, which is what helped him emerge to become a superstar. Grew in one all season, and that's when he became the big star. So, I mean, sometimes players, and this really shows in basketball, they have a growth spurt late. They refine their skills late. That happens sometimes. It looks like it may have happened with Chaz Lanier. So I think that, but I am still leaning 7 because of how late he bloomed. Now, also, the other part of this is if Chaz Lanier commits, I don't think he's guaranteed a starting spot. Let's break down Tennessee's roster real quick. Felix Okpara and Igor Milicic are their inside players. You have Darlington Dubar, who is their next Dalton Connect, is on the wing. You have Zakai Ziegler as the point guard. Chaz Lanier's got to beat out Jemai Mashak to be a starter. And we don't know if he's going to do that. Particularly when, as you can tell, Jemai Mashak has anybody more embraced developing under Rick Barnes than Mashak?
Man, I'm telling you, I wish if I ever start another career, Caleb, it's going to be as a prospect advisor. And I know there's not a lot of money because we're talking about some rural kids, some inner city kids who don't have a lot of money. But wouldn't you love to sit down with Chaz Lanier and say, I'm being objective here with you, buddy. If BYU offers you $5,000 more, you should still go to Tennessee based off Rick Barnes and the character that he will develop with you. And the fact that he's proven he can turn out a fantastic wing scorer in Dalton Connect. Not to mention he did so with a guy named Kevin Durant, I think was his name. So it just, to me, 5,000 or even 50,000 or even 100,000, I don't think would necessarily change my mind from making the better business decision. I know business is part money, but not the better NIL decision, the better future decision, maybe is a better way to put it. I just don't even think it's close. I off the top of my head, I don't know who BYU's head coach is.
I actually don't either. But
so he's not as storied as Rick Barnes. We know that. He doesn't have a 30-year career.
But the selling point, Dave, on this is playing time. If he's looking to build up his NBA profile, he's got to play a lot. And there's a lot of competition for Tennessee for playing time right now. I mean, he'll play, but would you rather be a rotational player in Rick Barnes' backcourt for your only year of eligibility, or would you rather be averaging 30 to 35 minutes a game for another team?
I'd rather have the ball in my hand and score a lot.
Which is the 30, 35 minutes a game.
Yeah.
That's where the BYU factor probably comes into play.
But I think, aren't all schools promising him that? Maybe with the exception of Kentucky because they have such a big class?
I don't think Tennessee can promise him a lot of playing time. They can't. Not with Darlington Dubar and Jemai Mashak. They can promise him to be in the rotation. They can't promise him 25 to 30 minutes a game. There's no way they can promise him that with their backcourt the way it is.
Well, if they lose him based off playing time, do they really need him that much anyway?
Well, I think that, yes, because they need a player like him in that rotation. They don't have that right now, particularly with Freddie DeLeon and Freddie DeLeon hitting the portal. But, the other part of this is we have to remember, I don't think Tennessee's as desperate for him because they are so high on Cameron Carr taking the next step. So we're talking the backcourt right now with Ziegler, Meshack, Dubar, and then Cameron Carr off the bench. But they would love a second guard that could really make a second backcourt scorer that could really make an impact. So, I mean, I think that's the big thing with Chaz Lanier. Now, I'm trying to remember exactly, because you're right, this is a guy looking for like that next splash, his final year of eligibility, the way the way Dalton connected, and I think Darlington Dubar is doing. However, at the same time, we could also bring up the fact that I believe he may actually have 2 years of eligibility left. No, he only has one. Because the COVID season doesn't count against him, but he also took a red shirt that year. So he only has 1 year of eligibility left. And so he's looking for maximum playing time his last year of eligibility.
In 2 words, I will give you the reason that BYU would scare me a little bit. Brought to you by Boundless Moving. From their 2-hour minimum to the turnkey operations, they've got you covered. Boundless Moving. Just Google them at Boundless Moving or go to boundlessmoving.com in East Tennessee or in Charlotte. 2 words why you shouldn't go to BYU. Multiple wives. The potential. I don't want to get caught up in that because you think about, you'd like 2 women interested in you, but really, when you get to our age, Caleb, you don't. 1 wife is enough. Is that not correct?
Oh, yeah. Having multiple girls when you're in college is one thing. Having multiple wives is
especially when you've got one that's like 8 months pregnant. You practically got multiple wives now because she should be so miserable, especially in the summer, that she should be a little gripey. And I'm going to go ahead and say that, Jordan, you have permission to be gripey to Caleb.
How fitting is it that Utah was the one place Karl Malone could play at over 20 years, given what he did?
Let's move along. This day in Tennessee sports history is coming up. By the way, with the internet, there's probably things about, I didn't know Larry Bird had an illegitimate child until like I was 40. And it kind of, he wouldn't talk to her, and it kind of turned me off on him a little bit. But
nowadays, at least it wasn't like
I know
statutory rape.
I know, but the point is, I didn't know that. My son, he can Google all these guys. So we're playing NBA Live, and he goes up and he's like, this Karl Malone guy's pretty cool. And then he looks him up and he's like, he comes downstairs and he's like, hey, Dad, did you know? And I'm like, I was hoping you wouldn't look that up. This day in Tennessee football history, we will have that in just one moment. You let me know when we've got that ready. Today's poll question: should Chaz Lanier or anybody else, any football players, any athletes have to go to class any longer, or should we just take out that facade? And I tend to believe we should. Do we have this day in Tennessee football sports history? Caleb, ready, or we want to?
Yes, actually, we do have this day in Tennessee sports history coming up.
Well, let's do it.
It is.
And can I tell you it's brought to you by?
Sure.
Cool. Apex Apparel Group Solutions. You can get 15% off your first order by just calling Tyler right down below, 865-919-3001. A full on-brand supply company. Call Tyler, 865-919-3001. Or you can go to orderapexapparel.com, orderapexapparel.com. They do so much more. They'll take care of all your promotional needs. They are phenomenal. Check them out. Again, that's Apex Apparel Group Design. Go to orderapexapparel.com. This day in Tennessee sports history is?
We'd like to send a special happy birthday to one of the players who had to belabor in the Dooley years, but also was a key part of the offense, being a record-setting offense in 2012. And it is a guy by the name of Justin Hunter. I'm sure you remember him, Dave.
It was funny because I actually have a clip from Justin Hunter, and this is what he actually said to Derek Dooley when his career was over and he was ready to move on.
You suck, yes, jackass.
See? Was able to pull that up. You didn't know I had that.
I did not know you had that. That's a good one. Hunter, everybody talked about Cordarrelle Patterson that year, and he was the playmaker with the ball in his hands. But people forget this. Justin Hunter, as a freshman, had over 400 yards receiving and 7 touchdowns. Derrick Rogers was the more highly touted recruit between the two. But Hunter was the better receiver. He had much better. How good was he on 50-50 balls before that ACL tear, Dave?
He was very good. He was, and of course there's the ACL. But as far as a guy that came in and didn't get the potential out, he would rank right up there as one of the top players that I've ever seen. And it's the ACL. But don't you also think in interviews and from talking to people, he was probably a little bit more enthused about being a student athlete than a star football player, or living life than being a star football player? I don't know that he just absolutely had to have it like the guys that we point to as true superstars.
Well, that showed with his NFL career because he didn't really last with the Titans. The Titans thought their future was Dave. The Titans thought their future was Jake Locker to Justin Hunter in the passing game at one point back in 2012 and to be fair, playing with Jake Locker hurt Justin Hunter's career, but we have to be fair. That 2012 season, Justin Hunter at Tennessee had 73 catches for 1,083 yards and 9 touchdowns coming off that injury. We just forget how productive that offense was with Tyler Braid, Justin Hunter, and Cordarrelle Patterson because Derek Dooley hired this guy named Sal Sinceri to run the defense that year and just absolutely wrecked his final year at Tennessee. That's why I've always said, I don't know. Look, Derek Dooley made a lot of mistakes, but Dave, he was somewhat sabotaged because Dave Hart refused to let him hire the assistants he wanted that last year.
Yep. There's truth to that. And on the message board, this wasn't exactly the topic we were going to go by, but it is pretty neat. Because Elias pointed out him talking about Justin Hunter and Mark Jones are two of the guys I would have killed to see under Heupel. Yeah, I can't argue with that. I mean, and I would say that even more than Cordarrelle Patterson, because I think Patterson had the drive, and I think he got the most out of his Tennessee experience. I just don't think Justin Hunter did for different reasons.
I'm going to say the guy I would have loved to see the most under Heupel would have been Dante Stallworth.
That's a good one.
Could you imagine and honestly Washington too, but like that duo, could you imagine Heupel with those two receivers? Now unfortunately, I have a lot of respect for Casey Clawson. I don't think Casey Clawson could be Heupel's type of quarterback though. You need a little mobility, and Clawson did not have that at all.
I think you're going to see, if Heupel spends 10 years at Tennessee, I think you're going to see I think Nico is going to be closer to a pocket style passer than everybody thinks, because I think what's going to happen is Tennessee's going to be able to run the football. They're going to load the box. So there's going to be less options for Nico to run. And I think he's more comfortable in the pocket. We'll see. Does Josh Heupel have to have a mobile quarterback? That's a whole different question. Maybe that's a topic for tomorrow, because
and for the record, mobility is not the same as dual threat.
Right. Yeah. We're not talking about the guy for the Eagles, Jalen Hurts. We're not talking about him. We're talking about a guy that can just be mobile every once in a while. That's interesting. I want to get into that because I would argue that being able to get the ball out quicker, having a quicker release and a quicker read would be more important than running with the football. But we do something on that tomorrow. That I like that. But as for now, I'm going to change gears a little bit. Tennessee, Caleb and I were talking over the weekend. He's always working, even on his birthday. He's like, Dave, we got to write this. We got to do this. And he says, Tennessee could have 10 players drafted in this upcoming draft. And I'm like, Caleb, just on the surface, that stuff crazy. Why is it not crazy? And you're not predicting 10, but 10 could make it, right?
Yes, actually, even more than that. So let's break down what Tennessee did in this offseason. And we talked about this. Tennessee has, I don't want to say adopted the Michigan model, but they've adopted the model that won Michigan a national championship.
And that is?
And that model is this. Rather than going for splash players in the transfer portal, they use their NIL money to keep players that were solid already in the program because they valued experience over the raw splash talent. And in this day and age of college football, that's a big deal. So here's why this matters.
Which I told you this is where NIL was going about 8 to 10 months ago, even before Michigan won their national championship. And told you about Joe Milton too. But anyway, go ahead.
You did. So, but a funny thing you bring up 8 to 10 months ago, about a year ago, actually. I almost said 8 to 10 years ago, but I learned a year ago. I did some tracking and research, and I determined that the best way to determine who would win the national champion in college football is who has the most players on NFL mock draft boards. And now that led me to pick Ohio State to win it last year. And that's why I'm very critical of Ryan Day for underachieving. Michigan wasn't on anybody's radar. And indeed, they only had one first-round pick in J.J. McCarthy, and he wasn't a first-round pick going into last year. Now, here's where this is a big deal. As you know, as I know, mock drafts are only first-rounders. No one spends their time doing a 7-round mock draft a year out at all.
No.
And so that's something I missed. So Michigan last year was on nobody's radar with number of first-round mock draft picks. They had a nation-leading 13 players drafted this past year in the NFL draft. 4 went in the 7th round. 6 were final day picks. The reason that's so relevant is what it meant is while Michigan wasn't loaded with superstars everywhere, they were loaded with very, very good players everywhere who had enough experience to propel themselves into NFL draft picks. So what did Tennessee do? Tennessee, for 2025, has 1 first-rounder. They have 1. They don't have less. They don't have more. James Pierce. We all know James Pierce is a first-rounder, right?
Yes. You say definitely not more.
I think they have a few second-day picks. Brew McCoy is a second-day pick.
Yeah,
He's not a
Brew
first-day
McCoy will go second because of the injury. And that
because of the injury.
Concern. Otherwise, he would have been a first-round pick.
Right. They have a fringe second to third day pick in Cooper Mays. I think Cooper Mays could be a second day pick, but I think he's starting the year as a third day pick. Would you say?
Yes, I think he's going to be around 3rd or 4th round. So, yes.
Yeah. Look at who Tennessee has coming back. And these are a bunch of players, guys, that could end up being later round NFL draft picks. Let's just start with the offensive line. John Campbell Jr., Javonte Spraggins. Both of them, third day picks.
Say wham.
I'll go 3rd day picks as well.
Okay. Let's go defense. Amari Thomas, third day pick. Not a superstar, but definitely a guy you want to draft in one of your later rounds.
Say wham.
I'm going to go 5th round for Amari. I know you
but
like
that's a
him.
third day pick.
It is. You like him a little more than me, but not vast differences.
Okay, let's keep going. Third day pick, Elijah Simmons, if he actually can emerge and do what he needs to do.
I wouldn't disagree with you there. I think it's either 2nd day pick or might not get drafted.
Okay, that's fair too. But what if the reason he could move into 3rd day is because he could blow away at the combine, but just not produce in the season. But either way, I can get with that. Either way, not a 1st day pick.
He could be a 1st round pick. He has that ability.
Right.
It's just been an injury, one after the other issue, which would also hurt him in the draft. So maybe let me backtrack that. He's a 3rd day no matter what, but it's going to be because of injury if he has a fantastic season, just a pre-existing injury. So I'm going to change my stance just a bit if you don't mind.
Okay, that's fine. Here's a 3rd day caliber pick who's probably not going to get picked because of his age. And you know where I'm going.
Keenan
Peely. He wouldn't get
I
drafted.
don't understand, Caleb. I don't understand the age thing. I really don't, because we've seen athletes play well into their late 20s, 30s, and then you have what Tom Brady has done. I don't understand. The average NFL career is what, 5 years or 4.5 years, I believe. If I can get 4.5 years out of Keenan Peely, and I think he's going to be my starting middle linebacker for 4 or 5 years, to me, you've won the battle. Who cares if he's healthy enough to last till he's 35? I mean, that doesn't bother me.
I'm with you. I'm totally with you. But let's just talk about this in terms of late round draft picks, in terms of how it applies to Tennessee in 2024.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to get you sidetracked. I'm just, yes, Third day. Let's say third day.
Yeah, third day caliber player, Keenan Pili. There are two, I think, second day players who are going to go into second day because they leave early because they stand out as stars this year, and that is Dylan Sampson and Squirrel White.
Could they both be drafted? Yes.
On the second day.
Yes, I would right now be stunned if they weren't drafted by the third day. I could see one of them slipping into a third day top pick.
Now, not to mention, Dave, I haven't even added Bryson Eason and Omar Norman Lott, two other veteran defensive linemen who could be draft quality players if Tennessee plays well this year. And I also haven't added this.
I don't feel strongly about Eason.
I don't feel strongly about either, but like I'm just saying they could. It's a possibility.
Sure.
And
when
then
you got a
secondary,
big body and you can move, you've got an opportunity.
Right, exactly. And then in the secondary, Tennessee added two veteran defensive backs, and it's Dalton Connect style to Rick Barnes with Jacoby Thomas at safety and Jalen McCoy, Jalen McMurray at cornerback. McMurray would be like the Gabe Giulilali of this past year. And if Gabe Giulilali had more support on the back end, he probably actually could have played his way into a draft pick. He got signed, and Jacoby Thomas could end up being effective. I'm not saying one of those guys couldn't be a late round draft pick or even both. So, when I lay all this out, I'm talking 14 players who could be draft caliber players next year, not even including the fact that Tennessee has a future first round pick at quarterback who just can't go out next year because he's not going to be eligible. So when you break all that down, can't Tennessee low key be the Michigan of 2024?
Yes, I've thought that. I didn't really, in all fairness, realize it was the Michigan model, but I thought that was the model that NIL was going to adapt to both at Tennessee and across the nation. I think we told you that early. We like to be a little bit ahead of the curve if we can around here, and we were. I did not know that was Michigan's first foray, or that they were one of the first forays into that, keeping your current players with NIL. But since you've educated me on that, then yes, but that's not just the Tennessee model. They may be a little bit ahead of the curve keeping their players, but that's going to be the model for all college football programs. Now, if the money gets enormous, then maybe you could go throw another $2 million a year at a Nico. But for the most part, I think you're going to want players to get on board in an introductory salary, which sounds weird, and then they can upgrade with a promised raise. You could even tie it to based off number of starts or based off how they played to awards. You could do all kinds of things to promise them that the money is going to be there. They're not just getting that opening, whatever it might be, $100,000 a year. They can get more than that. That's what you would have to tell them. But that's where NIL is going.
That's absolutely where it's going. Let me give you a great comparison with this, Dave. Now, it's not exact because the 98 and the 2000 or the 97 and 99 teams had more draft picks overall, but one of the reasons people think the 98 team wasn't as good as the 99 or 97 team is because the first round talent doesn't stand out as much, right? There's not a Peyton Manning and Marcus Nash and then a Sean Ellis and Jamal Lewis. You know what I mean? There was one first rounder, and that was Al Wilson.
Right. And a friend of the program, Fred White, told us that the 99 team was better than the 98 team.
Right. But the 98 team had one first rounder, but it had a lot of second to fifth rounders that were very solid. I mean, don't get me started on Peerless Price, who I think is the most clutch receiver of all time for Tennessee. Sean Bryson, third rounder. Steve Johnson, sixth rounder. Jeff Hall getting drafted. Corey Terry getting drafted. I mean, these are guys that they're not first rounders, but they're key parts of the 98 national title team, aren't they?
Yes. Merritt says, Crystal says, going back to our paying players, merit-based pay, which you have KPIs that keeps track of your activity. Lord, I hope it wouldn't get to that point. But Crystal, I'm wondering if I've won you over just a little bit, because they're not KPIs, but they would have a card where they would check in to their team meeting, and that would be their class. Go back and listen to that if you didn't get an opportunity to. We discussed in depth, should players even have to go back to class. Also, an update on Chaz Lanier, if you're just tuning in. We count down the 10 most important spring balls headed into the 2024 football season, and it's all brought to you by our good friends at Banks & Jones. T. Scott Jones I'm telling you, play to win. He will go to trial. Tennessee's trial attorney. Others don't do that. He does. For Caleb Calhoun, I'm Dave Hooker. This has been a